I was amazed to see the wrong answer on blog posts and articles that several well-known cruise writers, bloggers and vloggers give to a question that we all get asked frequently, which is, I want to go on an ocean cruise on a non-USA owned line. What are my options? I was surprised how some of those supposed cruise experts get the answer wrong by mostly confusing where a cruise line is based or is actively catering for a local market or region for being non-USA owned. For example, one of my followers using a list of non-USA owned lines she'd seen online told me she'd booked a well-known Norwegian cruise line instead, but I had to tell her it was in fact a company that was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Welcome aboard, I'm Gary Bembridge, and I spent time diving deep into this topic. And even though I thought I knew who owned what, there were a couple of surprises along the way I uncovered due to some recent ownership changes that had gone under the radar. But first, a couple of amazing revelations. My analysis showed USA companies dominate cruising way more than even I had appreciated. First, US owned lines carry almost 9 out of 10 passengers, 87%, including on lines that passengers think are locally owned or operated. Second, based on passengers carried, only one of the top 15 cruise lines is not wholly or partly owned by a US listed corporation, a US private equity firm, or a US family or privately owned company. Thirdly, there is only one large mass market resort style and value line that's not owned by a US company. And cruising non-US owned lines means mostly having to stump up for luxury and ultra luxury small ships. So let's dive into the detail. First, I want to talk about the ones that most passengers think they know all about, but because many don't know about the joint ventures some of these corporations have, they actually think that some cruise lines are locally owned when they're not. They're ultimately US owned. Carnival Corporation carries 42% of all cruise passengers and own 8 cruise lines: Carnival Cruise Line, Princess Cruises, Holland America, Seabourn, and those more locally focused lines like German-focused AIDA, Italian-focused Costa, and British-focused P&O Cruises and Cunard Cruise Line. But they also own 40% of a Chinese joint venture, Adora Cruises. Norwegian Cruise Group carries around 10% of passengers today and own 3 cruise lines: Norwegian Cruise Line, Oceania, and Regent Seven Seas Cruises. Royal Caribbean Group is where most people, including many of those writers, bloggers and vloggers that I mentioned earlier, get wrong because they miss out some of their joint venture lines. They wholly own Royal Caribbean International, Celebrity Cruises and Silversea. However, they have a 50-50 joint venture with TUI Cruises in Germany, and so they part own the German-focused Mein Schiff and Hapag-Lloyd and the UK-focused Marella Cruises. So if you're looking for a German experience or a UK experience, those lines will do the job, but they do have USA parents. Also owned by and listed on the US stock exchanges, of course, are Disney Cruise Line, because it's part of the Walt Disney Corporation, and actually Lindblad National Geographic. I found that many passengers think the next 2 cruise lines are European owned based on their very high profile leaders and their origin story, but they are not. The first is the one that I referred to earlier, Viking Cruises. It was created in Norway by Torsten Hagen, but he sold part of it way back in 2016 to USA private equity companies and was listed on the US Stock Exchange in May 2024, meaning it has many US owners. Many also think of Virgin Voyages as being British because of the association with the entrepreneur Richard Branson. However, it's actually a joint venture with US Bain Capital, private equity in the US, putting up most of the money, and the Virgin Group bringing the brand name. Other private equity line firms own several cruise lines, one of which I must admit I really think will surprise you because it did me. So private equity owned Azamara, Margaritaville at Sea, Ritz-Carlton Yachts, which is not part of Ritz-Carlton Hotels, by the way, it just licenses the name, Quark Expedition Line, and the Greek line Celestial Cruises, which I had always thought was Greek owned and operated. US private companies owned Windstar, American Cruise Line, and the new Four Seasons Yachts, which is owned by a real estate mogul who owns several Four Seasons properties, and he's working in partnership with the hotel chain, but it's not actually part of Four Seasons as such. With the USA side clarified, it's time to dive into the lines owned and operated 100% out of the United States. There are 4 privately owned cruise groups in Europe. The largest and most significant are the lines owned by the Mediterranean Shipping Company. Now, this is a family-owned company. MSC Cruises is their main cruise line, which is the 3rd largest cruise line in the world based on passengers carried after Carnival and Royal Caribbean. It's actually bigger than the Norwegian Cruise Line. They have a new luxury line called Explorer Journeys as well now. The second European and family-owned group is the Ponant Group, owned by the French Pinault family. They have 3 lines in the group: Ponant Cruises, an ultra-luxury cruising and expedition line. They have Port Gauguin, a luxury line in French Polynesia, and Aqua Expeditions. The third privately owned group is the Mystic Invest Group, based in Portugal. Now, they have within the group the recently launched Atlas Ocean Voyages, an expedition-focused line, Mystic Cruises, focused on small ship expedition and cruising, and Nico Cruises, which targets more the German market. The fourth is the Heritage Group, based in Monaco, which is owned by Manfredi Lefebvre d'Ovidio, whose family created and owned Silversea before they sold it to Royal Caribbean. Now, this group owns the ultra-luxury Crystal Cruises through their Abercrombie and Kent subsidiary. There are several lines thought of as Norwegian based on their history and the routes they operate in, though I discovered only 3 actually remain under Norwegian ownership and not the ones that most people think are. One of the most famous is Hurtigruten and HX Expeditions, which was spun off out of the Hurtigruten group. Both of those lines, after facing some financial challenges, are actually now privately owned by separate UK private equity companies. The only Norwegian-owned cruise lines these days are Havila Voyages, which are similar to Hurtigruten, Sea Dream, the luxury small yacht company, and actually Fred Olsen, which focuses on the UK but is part of the Norwegian-listed company called Bonheur. In the UK, there's also several locally owned cruise lines. There's Saga Cruises, which is part of the Saga Group, which is for 50-plus-year-old travelers only. There's the Ambassador Group, which has Ambassador Cruise Line, a small ship value line, and also the small French line, I'm going to massacre this pronunciation, Compagnie Française de Croisières. I apologize for that. And then in Scotland, there is the Hebridean Island Cruises. There's a smattering of small privately owned lines in Europe like Swan Hellenic and Star Clippers. In the rest of the world, there is the Australian Scenic and Emerald luxury yachts, which are part of one group. And in Asia, there is the Singapore-based Resorts World, who have brought back Star Cruises and Dream Cruises, which went bankrupt just after the pandemic shutdown as part of the Genting operation. And in Japan is Mitsui Ocean Voyages, which has been buying and revamping some of the older seaborne ships. If you want to cruise on a non-USA line, you're limited, especially if you're cruising on a budget or kind of want a more family-focused line. So in the mass and value market, you've really only got MSC Cruises. Then all the rest are mostly in the small ship luxury side, like Explorer Journeys, Sea Dream, Atlas World Voyages, or in the ultra luxury side, lines like Crystal, Ponant, Port Gauguin, Scenic, and Emerald yachts. There are several local and regional lines catering specifically for either immersive destination cruising like Norwegian Hurtigruten, Havalia, and Scottish Hebridean Island Cruises, or those that are reflecting local language or onboard experiences like UK-focused Saga, Fred Olsen, Ambassador, French Ponant, German Nico, and Portuguese Mystic. Now, because I know all of this is a bit complex, I've created a download that lists all of the cruise line and who owns them, and you can download that at tipsfortravelers.com/owners. But before you do, why don't you join me over in this video looking at what it takes and how much it really costs to live on a cruise ship these days. See you over there.